There isn't really a whole lot that I know or that I've been told because we don't have a whole lot of information. But what I do know from the papers that I've read is that in March of 1974, I was abandoned by my birth mother. And I was found on a street in Seoul and then taken to a police station who then referred me to Holt, Korea. And then from there, I never was in an orphanage or anything. Straight from probably my intake physical at Holt, I was placed into foster care. I was with a foster family. There was a mom and a dad, and I believe an older brother who was in his 40s at the time. I was there for about 3 months, and then I came to the United States. My parents adopted me. They had two children of their own before then. So I have two older siblings, a brother and a sister. Um, and I started my life here with the family that I know, that I've always known. So um, this all happened when I was about 18 months when I came from Korea. And from there, um, I don't know, I grew up in small Midwestern towns. My father was a professor, so we lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, then East Lansing, and then we made our way to Ames, Iowa, where Iowa State is. And I grew up in primarily white Midwestern college town communities. Um, I was probably, well, so when um, I was adopted when I was about 18 months, and then when I was almost 4, we adopted my younger brother. My younger brother was older when he was adopted because we were only 6 months apart. So he was about 3.5 when he came. So aside from my brother and I, there were probably about, I don't know, 5 other Asians in my community. So it was primarily white. I grew up Irish Catholic. My whole upbringing was very white. There weren't a whole lot of opportunities to learn about Korean culture. And when there were opportunities, my parents would, try to talk to me about that and expose me to that, but I never really was interested. I think when you're growing up, especially when you don't look like anyone else, the first thing and the only thing you're really focused on is trying to fit in. So I never really was real open to the idea of learning about my heritage and culture because it just meant something weird and it meant that I didn't fit in somehow. So, and back then we didn't have Heritage Camp, so there just wasn't a whole lot of opportunity. So really, the only opportunity I had was, we would invite Asian students of my dad's to come over for dinner, and like that was going to expose me to anything or teach me anything, which it didn't. So I don't really know why we did that, but just the novelty of everything, I guess. I don't know. Um, so I really had no exposure. We bought kimchi at a Korean market one time, and I didn't like it. It just stunk up our fridge. Um, so I guess growing up, one, I didn't have the opportunity to be exposed to heritage and culture. And secondly, I just wasn't interested. I really just wanted to fit in with the rest of my friends and family. And I mean, for the most part, I never even thought about being adopted. Um, it just wasn't at the forefront. And when you're not looking at yourself all the time and you're just looking at the people around you, you know, what you see around you is all white. And so you just forget that you're Asian in this environment. And I did a lot of the times. When I was a senior in high school, I remember the college or the high school counselor calling me into her office one day, and we were all applying for colleges. And she came in and she said, she asked me if I ever considered applying for minority scholarships. And I looked at her like, why? Why would I ever consider that? I mean, and she had known my older sister and my older brother and my family. And I'm looking at her like, really? Not a minority. And it just was shocking to me that I could potentially get federal money from just because of the color of my skin and because of my ethnic background, where I didn't feel any way, shape, or form Asian. But here I could go on paper, say that I'm Asian, and potentially get financial assistance to go to school. And it was surprising to me because it didn't seem right to me because that wasn't who I was. And I almost felt like it was lying on a application that I was Asian. I went to college and I move into the dorms. I meet all these people and everyone becomes your best friend. And I'm unpacking. And I put a picture out on my desk and it's me and my entire family. And everyone was like, okay, Jen, who are all these white people in this in this picture? And then I was just shocked through this whole experience of, the administration at my high school, the university, my friends. It was really, really shocking to me that I had to, for the first time, explain my existence to people. I think up until then, I was kind of sheltered and cushioned from it because I lived in small towns and everyone knew my family. Everyone knew my older siblings and my parents, and they knew that, I was one of the adopted siblings. And so it was just really this whole string of events, I think, was hard. It made me mad. It made me embarrassed that I had to explain my existence to other people when I never had to, and when no one else ever has to. And I have to explain to people why I'm not like them or like another minority and I think that's probably one of the reasons why growing up I've always been, I guess, adverse to making friends who are Asian, because I never wanted to get put in that bucket. I feel like there's this adopted bucket that I actually feel more comfortable with, other friends who have been adopted because they kind of understand that and they kind of get what it's like to be white on the inside and Asian on the outside. And they get what it's like to fit in multiple buckets, I guess. It wasn't until probably the time when I started thinking about having a family of my own did I really think about what adoption meant to me and how that played into who I was. So my husband and I, we met in high school. We dated all through and then got married several years later. And when we were starting to think about having children, so just to back up, my parents have always been open about my adoption. They've always been open about talking about it. They've just been really supportive when they can and in any way that they can. So they've always left the door open for me to, they said that they would take me to Korea whenever I wanted. And so occasionally my mom would ask me growing up, do you ever think about your birth, Mom? Do you ever want to go back to Korea? And it was always no, I don't want nothing to do with Korea. I don't know who my birth mom is, so I don't want to go and do that. Because I am who I am, you're my mom, and that was that. And then right around the time when my husband and I started thinking about having a family of our own, I went to my mom and I said, I know it's been 30 years since I was in Korea before, but I think it's time for me to go back. I went to my mom and I said, I think now is the time that I would like to go back to Korea. I hadn't thought about Korea until now. I hadn't thought about my heritage or my birth mom or anything. But I think just the whole thought of building a family of my own really, I started thinking about my birth mom as a person and as a mom. And before, she had always been this abstract idea of a person because my concrete mom was my mom. And so this abstract thing that's supposed to be my birth mom was never there, and I just couldn't touch her or see her, or and so she never made sense to me, and I never really thought of her as a person. She was an idea. And now when I was thinking about, okay, I want to be a mom and have a family of my own, I started thinking about her for the first time as a person, as somebody who gave birth to me and who had to make a difficult decision to leave me. And so I went and I talked to my mom, and I thought this would be a really good time. And I know that, and even now, there's probably a zero chance of me ever finding her or even finding any sort of answers. But I thought, a trip back to Korea would be healthy and that was just the right time to go back. And I remember at one point on the trip, my mom, we had spent that day. This was a day when all of the other adoptees on the trip had got to meet up with their foster moms, and they couldn't find my foster mom. And so, one of the hosts on our trip took my family and I on a tour to the neighborhood where that was noted in my papers. And so we drove around, and we definitely could have been on the street that I was abandoned on. And so he told us he kind of told us some background about what adoption was like in the 70s and all of that, and the situation that a lot of moms and families were in at the time. And so it kind of helped put a little bit of more context around my abandonment. But we had done this all day. We went around and learned a little bit more about maybe my circumstance around my adoption. And later that night, on our way up to our hotel rooms, we were on the elevator, and my mom, turned to me and said, I always thought to this very day that I got to choose you. That she said, I didn't get to choose your brother and your sister. They were just the babies who came out. I didn't get to choose them. But I always thought in my head that I got to choose you because I chose adoption. And she said that today she realized that wasn't true, that so many things had to have been aligned for me to be her daughter, that, my birth mom abandoned me on that day. I was taken into Holt's care on that day. They were actually not even thinking when they had first started the adoption process, they actually weren't even planning on Korea. They were looking at a different country, and then that adoption program actually fell apart. So, you know, so all of these things happened for me to be her daughter, and she just finally that day she came to realize that just the stars were aligned and that we were meant to be mother and daughter. And I thought that was pretty cool, because I didn't find any answers. I wasn't really looking for answers in Korea, but I didn't find any more information about my birth mom. But there was this comfort of knowing, of realizing, I guess, that I was meant to be my mom's daughter. Adoption was never part of my plan to build a family. I never wanted to adopt, and it's not because of my experience or anything. I just wanted to have a biological connection with somebody, and I didn't have that. And so, and I saw that biological connection with my parents and my older siblings, and it was something that I think, I mean, I wanted to experience. I saw it as being different and sacred. And I felt like that was probably the one thing that was missing out of my life. But when we were in Korea, we had visited these orphanages, and my husband really connected with this little boy at one of the orphanages. And when it was time to leave, the little boy was just clinging to him, and both of them kind of teared up as we were leaving. And John had made just a strong connection with this little boy. And he turned to me. He said, well, if we just took two of these guys home, we could be done. But, and I think that was the first time that I even thought, even adoption. Like it never even came into my realm of thought about having my own children. And I was like, no way, we're not adopting. And so we went home, and for the next 2.5 years, we tried to get pregnant, and we couldn't. And it was at the point where I'd been through all kinds of tests and procedures and this and that. And I actually had 3 miscarriages. And so it was just a really hard process to go through. And my doctor at that point was like, I can't do anything else for you. I'm going to have to refer you to a specialist. And so at that point, I was just so emotionally exhausted. My husband was exhausted. And so we were done. I didn't want to go see a specialist. I didn't want to go get poked and prodded anymore. So we started thinking about adoption at that point. And so we had reached out to Holt at the time and started, getting familiar with some of what it all took to adopt. And I still was kind of on the fence. This wasn't my plan. And I'm such a planned person that the last 3 years of my life hadn't been part of my plan. And it was really hard for me, but I was still kind of going through the motions. We got the applications, we got the paperwork. And I think I was dragging my feet a little bit. We were going through the process pretty slow, and I got pregnant. So we obviously put that on hold, and my son was born. And I, when he was born, and in those first few weeks, first few years, I was so mad at my birth mom. This was the second time through this whole process, I'd been thinking about her. I thought about her before we started thinking about getting pregnant, and thought about her, as my birth mom. And then through the process of failed attempts of getting pregnant, I thought of her like, this is so unfair because obviously she could get pregnant and I can't. She didn't pass that on to me. So, and then when he was born, I was so mad because I could not understand why and how a mom can give up her child. I had gone through so much to have this child that I would do anything. At that point I would do anything that I could to ensure his survival and ensure, and I would do anything for him. And I just felt like, how does a birth mom give up her child? Because I don't know how you break that bond. I don't know how you can decide to break that bond. And I was thinking, I don't care how desperate you are, I would die for my child. And I was just really, really angry at her. And I think over time that anger has subsided, because if you look at the other side of it, it's, look how much she sacrificed. If that bond is so difficult to be broken and something that I could not fathom doing myself, then look at the strength that it must have taken her. And so at the time I couldn't think that way, and I think now I think more that way, but there's always two sides of it, and I can't walk in her shoes and understand what she went through and understand the motives of her decision. But I just remember being so pissed at her. I knew that both my husband and I wanted to have multiple children, and so we were thinking about child number 2, and I was not prepared to go through more trauma of having another child, and so we actually did decide to adopt, which I just found ironic because my entire life I never wanted to adopt. But we decided to, and we adopted a little girl from Korea. And that whole entire process, the process leading up to getting her, I was just really, the whole process of motherhood, I think, put my adoption in perspective and really showed me what adoption meant to me, and showed me how it shaped who I am. And we got the call on the Friday before Thanksgiving of that year, and we were on the plane that Sunday to go get her. We were there we met her on Tuesday at the adoption agency, and we were only able to spend about an hour with her and her foster mom. And then we left and hung out on Wednesday, just running around the city and eating good food and stuff, and freaked out that we were about to bring home this baby. And then on Thursday, we woke up, went to the adoption agency, picked her up, said goodbye to our foster mom, and took her to the airport. And up until then, I was so excited and so excited to have a daughter and to bring a daughter home. And then the moment came, and we're at the adoption agency, and her foster mom had been carrying her around the entire time we were there. When we were there, she had to have her final travel physical to make sure she checked out healthy before we got on a plane. And so her foster mom was carrying her around and everything. And her foster mom had been with her for 9 months since she brought her home from the hospital, and my daughter was 9 months at that time. And then when it was time for us to leave, her foster mom handed the baby over to me, and the baby just was screaming. and I mean, could sense that something big was happening. And she screamed the entire time, from the time I got her in my arms to all the way to the airport. Um, and that entire time she was screaming, I felt like I was stealing a baby. I felt like I wasn't bringing home my daughter. I felt like I was stealing this baby who'd been with her foster mom, the only mom she knew for 9 months. And it was just such mixed emotions. I felt so bad for this baby, and I felt bad for the foster mom, even though this is what she had signed up for. But I can imagine every time, she had fostered a child, this is what it's like when you say goodbye. You're up at 4 o'clock in the morning every night, 3, 4 times a night with this child for the first months of her life. And so I just felt like I was stealing another child. It didn't feel like she was mine yet. And it took about probably, I would say, a good 9 to 12 months for me to finally feel like she was my daughter, and for her to finally feel like I was safe. I don't know if she actually felt like I was her mother at that point. She probably did, but the trauma that she goes through, or that she went through that first year. So when we first brought her home, she actually, we had been through all these adoption training courses about attachment and about what you should do when you bring the baby home first and this and that. And I always kind of brushed it off like, oh, she'll like me right away because I look Korean. Well, I was completely wrong. She wanted nothing to do with me. She immediately attached to my son and my husband. And the attachment to me was a really long, hard process. It took several weeks for her to even be in the same room as me. I just remember, if my husband walked into the room, her whole face would just light up and she'd smile and be all happy to see him. And if I walked in the room, she'd look the other way, or she just wouldn't acknowledge me, or she'd cry. She cried a lot at the sight of me. And so I think it was just a really hard process for her, because here I am, imposter mom that she doesn't know, trying to be mom. And it was just a confusing and traumatic time for her. So I didn't blame her for it, but it was just a really hard process, I think, on both sides. But through this whole thing, I was like, I wasn't like this. I would call my mom and be like, how long did it take me to smile? How long did it take me to eat? And I mean, I went through the same stuff. And so that was actually nice to call my mom every now and then and be like, was it like this with me? Did I make you feel this bad? And so it was nice to have that. But it also opened my eyes up to, I mean, here I was watching the trauma that my daughter was going through, and in some ways kind of reliving that trauma of, oh my gosh, this is what I was asked to do that many years ago. This is what the process I had to go through. And not all, kids go through this traumatic process in all different ways. And she may have done it differently than me, but it's the same trauma. It's that broken bond and that broken kind of, you don't have your mom anymore. And it was just really kind of insightful and hard to see that, because I saw me in her a lot in that first year. And then after that first year, she started smiling and laughing and being her mischievous self. And she came out of her shell. And for all intents and purposes, I'm her mom. And so it was so going back to thinking, building up to this time, I was thinking this was going to be full circle. And I don't think of it as full circle anymore. I think it's just this ongoing journey that, you know, my daughter was meant to be my daughter, and she's going through her journey, and she'll go through it the rest of her life. And it's just that her journey has intersected with mine. It's not that I've found answers or that I've gotten closure for adopting a daughter. It's that she's giving me, I guess, a lot more insight into who I am by watching her and by watching her become who she is. So it's been cool.